Merhabalar, Space 2026'ya hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Space'in 5. yılını yine güçlü, zengin ve renkli bir programla ve büyük bir gurur ve heyecanla açıyoruz. Aralıksız devam eden Space, mimarlık, iç mimarlık, tasarım, sanat ve iş dünyası arasında disiplinler arası bir diyalog platformu. Düşünce üretimini, kültürel içeriği, sektörler arası işbirliklerini aynı mekanda buluşturuyor. 5 yılda bu mekanda 85 marka, 8500 ziyaretçi, 110 konuşmacıyla güçlü bir etkileşim hafızası oluşturduk. Bu yıla geldiğimizde en belirgin farklılık ise Space'in uluslararası bir platforma dönüşmesi. Bugün konuşmacı profili ve katılımcı marka yapısı bu düşünsel zemini daha geniş bir coğrafyaya taşıyan güçlü bir kurguya işaret ediyor. Bu sene programın açılışını Time Use Next listesinde yer alan tek mimar ve Wallpaper Architect of the Year ödüllü Lina Ghotmeh yapacak. Türkiye'de ilk kez Space sahnesinde yer alacak olması bizim için gerçekten çok kıymetli. Yerelden beslenen, çok katmanlı ve uluslararası ölçekte karşılık bulan mimarlık yaklaşımı onu davet etmemizin en önemli nedenlerinden biri. Space'in gücünü aldığı temel zemin, hız, geçicilik, hafıza kurmak, derinleşmek, kalıcılık. 5 yıldır bu etkinlik aynı mekanda, aynı sayıda markayla gerçekleşiyor. Bizim için büyüme çokluk üzerinden değil, seçici, güçlü ve anlamını koruyan bir derinleşme üzerinden ilerleyen bir yaklaşım. Aynı zamanda sürdürülebilir olanı, geçiciliğin karşısında duran ve uzun vadede anlamlı izler bırakan işler üretmeyi çok önemsiyoruz. Space'in düşünsel programını destekleyen bir üretim ekosistemi ile her bir markada farklı biçimlerde karşılık buluyor. Şimdi ekranlarda görecek olduğunuz markalarla birlikte olmaktan biz gerçekten çok mutluyuz. Her birini tek tek sayamayacağım burada. Ama bütün bu salonu çevreleyen ve burada bu alanı beraber yarattığımız, beraber ev sahibi olduğumuz kıymetli markalara çok teşekkür ediyorum. Space'te bu yıl 3 farklı sergi yer alıyor. In Space Mekanlar Seçkisi'nin 4. edisyonu. Aşağıda bu salona o sergiden geçerek girdiniz. 23 proje yer alıyor ve küratörlüğünü Heval Zeliha Yüksel yaptı. Art Zone'da küratör Derya Yücel'in Dönüşümün Simyası başlıklı karma seçkisi yer alıyor. Ve mimar Enis Öncüoğlu'nun 300 mimar portresinden oluşan formal sergisi mimarlık dünyasını belgeleyen güçlü bir görsel arşiv olarak Space'te bulunuyor. Tüm bu yapı aslında tekrar başladığımız yere getiriyor bizi. Space'in neden var olduğu sorusuna. Hızın dışında daha olgun, sessiz ve derin bir düşünme alanı üretmek. Space'i Türkiye ve İsviçre'de aktif olarak çalışan DAC ve DAC Switzerland olarak tasarlıyor ve her yıl geliştirmek için çaba harcıyoruz. Sizlerin ilgisiyle ve desteğiyle buraya taşıdık. Önümüzdeki yıllarda da çıtayı daha yükseğe çekmek için çalışmaya devam edeceğiz. Today, we open space with a voice that reminds us that architecture is not only about building, but also about remembering, interpreting, and imagining. Lina Ghotmeh approaches architecture as a form of deep listening to place, to material, and to memory. Through her practice, she weaves together architecture, history, and ecology into a coherent and sensitive language of space. Born in Lebanon and based in Paris, she is the founder of Lina Ghotmeh Architecture and the author of a powerful design philosophy she calls Archaeology of the Future. This approach doesn't simply look forward. It excavates the present through the layers of past, shaping architecture through site-specific research, collective memory, and a profound relationship with nature. Her work spans from the award-winning Stone Garden to the Serpentine Pavilion 2023, from the Hermes workshops to the Estonian National Museum, each project expressing a precise balance between material sensitivity, sustainability, and narrative depth. She is currently leading major cultural projects, including the British Museum and Elula Contemporary Art Museum, further extending her architectural dialogue on heritage and future making. Lina Ghotmeh has taught at institutions including Yale, Harvard, and the University of Toronto, and has been widely recognized internationally, including being named in Time 100 Next and as Wallpaper Architect of the Year 2026. It's now a great honor for us to welcome her to Space Stage today, her first appearance in Turkey.
Hello everyone, günaydın. I will speak in English. Sorry, this is my only word in Turkish, but I'm very happy to be among you today. Really a pleasure to give this talk. As has been introduced, so I will be introducing my work, talking about the process of designing and sharing with you those insights. It will be fantastic if we can turn off as much as possible the surrounding lights so you can see better the screens as well. My methodology of work is based on the archaeology of the future, which is really looking always at Earth when we start any project. And that's something that is really fantastic about architecture itself, that when we start a design, we're always looking at this earth that we share together, that does not belong to one nation, but belongs to all of us on the ground. And this is something that I've been always thinking about when I grew up in Beirut. So Beirut is a city that is constantly built upon itself, as you know. And as we see in this photograph, we see also this endless Mediterranean Sea, so nature that brings beauty, despite all the concrete and construction that we see around. Growing in Beirut is also about looking at archaeology, looking at a city that is built upon itself, where we always see archaeology growing and understand the civilization of the past, something that we see very much also in Turkey and Istanbul, this relationship to history and how architecture weathers away. And when I saw those grounds, I was always fascinated to see how architecture becomes traces, and how can we build in relationship to this ground, in relationship to nature. And when you look at what scientists tell us, they tell us that we are more microbes than we are human beings. So that really brings a sense of humility and a sense of relationship to nature. So when I'm practicing architecture with my team, we're always thinking how much nature is there in architecture, how to bring nature as part of architecture. Nature being not only vegetation, but also the living ecosystem. So when every new idea comes, it's not really about building something new, it's about digging, really understanding the place and trying to make an architecture that echoes the environment in which we build. Like this obelisk that we see in Egypt that was still sculpted with the ground, and we see that it's made of the material of the place. Architectural work is one that is about evolution, about transformation. And that's why we think architecture is really between archaeology, between the past, what it means, the history of a place. It's also between humanity, so about inclusivity, diversity. It's about nature and about the future, because every act of architecture brings something new. So our process of design is never linear. It's really about a process that is very multifaceted, that talks about material tests, that looks at references from different contexts, ask questions every time we design. And the work of the hand is something that is very important, because it brings back emotion in architecture and in what we do. So from the smaller scale, in, for example, this hanger in a bar of earth that we have designed in a restaurant in France and Paris, to a paint of craftswork, or giving texture to material, or texture to a house that we have designed, like a residency, whether it's natural light or artificial light, is really about bringing that magic, that atmosphere in those spaces that are able to transport people. And light plays a very important role, because it reveals the material. It reveals really the work of the hand, like we see here in this Yuhan Tenmuku, which is this very ancient ceramic technique that is used in China and is spread now in Japan. So when designing, sometimes I feel like we are cooking. We are not really just building. We're looking at materials, bringing them together, and building a certain sense to an environment. So those sketches, looking at models, and transforming that. And our work spans of different scales, so it goes from a smaller scale or like temporary scale, like the Serpentine Pavilion in London, to larger scale buildings. So I'll start to show a few projects and show how the methodology of design is reflected in those projects. One of them is at-table. At-table means like come together around the table. And maybe it's something very much present in Turkish culture, but also Lebanese culture. We always come together around the table, whether to eat and whether to gather with one another. So this pavilion is in front of the Serpentine Gallery. It's a commission that is done every year for architects around the world. And I was asked to design this pavilion that is lasting for a few months. And when designing this pavilion, the question is, what is a pavilion, you know? And how can a pavilion reflect the history of pavilions around the world? We started looking at the etymology of the word pavilion, and historically, the word pavilion comes from the word papillon, which means butterfly in French, and it's about this kind of a pleating structure that is hanging on very thin columns. But also I was interested in looking at other cultures, what pavilions mean in other culture. And if you look at the Dogon people in Mali, they build these heavy pavilions with these heavy roofs actually, and they invite the elderly of the village to sit under them to converse on difficult matters. And actually the pavilion is very low, because if they want to fight between each other because they disagree, they stand and they bump their head. So basically it allows them to stay seated and to converse in a non-violent way. So this is really a way also to think of architecture as a way to bring on another behavior and another relationship between one another. And as we're sitting here circularly, in a circular manner, I wanted also that this is about a conference in this pavilion. So this table is bringing people together in a way of a dialogue, of a talk, rather than of a, kind of a hierarchical way. Almost like a Stonehenge, you know, because it's built in London. I was thinking about, you know, what are pavilions in London? And Stonehenge is this structure that we don't know why is it built for. And as I design, I think about, you know, light, I think about nature, I work with watercolors, with drawings, and think also of origins and how to echo questions that are related to our relationship to Earth. And again, food is the way we relate to Earth, because it is the way we root ourselves in our places, in Earth. And this relationship to food was enacted with this table that we see in this pavilion, and where people could sit and gather and really find another way to relate to one another. The structure of the whole pavilion is built by this simple element, this simple structure that is arrayed, and this is a beam that is sitting on two columns, and that really generates this whole structure. But also the roof of it echoes that of a leaf, because as we see in nature, we have these main structures, and then between the different main structures, we have the secondary structures that hold the whole thing. So the architecture of it is really inspired by that of a park, because it is also located in a park. And wood is a low-carbon material. It allows us to build in, more sustainably, to assemble, disassemble the construction. So the pavilion was really a place for people, where people gathered, where kids played. And I always say the best success of a project is when kids are happy to use a place. This was like a video that they produced, like seeing how this pavilion sits next to the Serpentine Pavilion. And if you're interested to know more about this project, there is a book that was published, which is part of the Serpentine publications. Staying with this lightweight construction and temporary construction is the pavilion of Bahrain in Osaka. As you know, recently there was the International Expo of Osaka in Japan. And we won this competition to build the permanent, pavilion actually of Bahrain there. So when thinking how to build, in Japan and how to express an identity of a country, of Bahrain that is very far from Japan, but also how to think of similarities between these two countries. As we see, Bahrain is almost an archipelago, Japan is an island. So thinking of both, what connects them is the sea, is this idea of boat faring. And when we look at Manama, actually the city has all those boat constructions, these dock constructions that are in wood, and that express this idea of travel from one place to the other. And I was really impressed with those almost monster-like, boats that are put along the shoreline, and that show these constructions of boats that are crafted. Something that you see very much also in Turkey as you go around the coastline and you see those boat construction. But also the story of the Ark of Noah, because apparently the story has happened really in a mount in Bahrain, in the country. So I wanted to express this idea of under construction and also this construction of a door, but also use a material that Japanese people are able to master and to have the pleasure to build this construction that is joining two cultures together. So the whole pavilion is built in wood. It's about this open boat that is sitting in its environment. And we did these multiple iterations of the shape of how it could be. And then this idea of this kind of almost under construction structure that feels moving, that is just embarking in Osaka and surrounded by water. And the whole construction is done by those 4 meters long wood. So they are unengineered wood. Why unengineered is because we can actually reuse all the material back. So nothing is wasted. It's not laminated wood. We can really bring it back to the market. But it also raises the challenge of building a structure that can hold, that can be really magically like echoing movement as well. So the pavilion sat there, it echoed both Bahrain culture and Japanese culture. Its structure became also a delightful space where you walk in and you see all the light, you see all the reflection of the surrounding. These fins that are both structural and at the same time talking about movement. They move, like they show this like repetition as well, the shadowing of the structure as well. And then we, during the process, this kind of a bracing that had happened. And when you walk inside, you feel that you are really in the interstitial moment of a space. So you're really walking in this kind of movement or in this unfinished construction. And it echoes also Japanese culture with this washi like facade that we see here. When you enter into this building, which was really actually spatially constrained, I wanted to feel volume and space. So we enter there and we have this kind of feeling of generosity of space, where we have these kind of like a fabric in which there are projections, but also where we have multiple perspectives within this space. So people are able to see one another moving across the skin of that construction, but also allowing this kind of a stage-like feeling, almost like this is a celebratory space as well. As you move inside the structure on the upper levels, you have all the exhibition about, seafaring. They even actually here, they had, because they were one of the first to work with metal and producing of coins, you have smells that echo historical smells, but also smell of money. That was the most successful part. And then you have these boats and the restaurant that is positioned here. This is how it manifested itself at night. Continuing on this journey of building with wood is a permanent structure that we are doing now in Toyama, in Japan. And actually the same wood that we used in the pavilion in Osaka will be used for the landscaping of this area. And here it's an observatory for nature, and we are here in Toyama, so really discovering Japan and its beauty, but also multiplicity. And the site is close to Nanto City. So Nanto City is a city that is very well known for those buildings that are with thatched roof. So it's a lot about traditional construction. And the site is culminating on a higher hill. And the idea was how to build an observatory that really brings all the development within this, site together. And we're here, we have this kind of view of a provincial state next to, in Japan, that a lot of Japanese love, and they call it Satoyama. So the Satoyama is this love of nature and this tame nature that is relating to to humans in a way. And in a way, it also reminded me of, if you have seen Miyazaki movies, they always set up with this amazing, drive in the nature where you see the fields of rice. And thought about that idea of movement and how to echo that playfulness that we can see in also Miyazaki structures, in animations. And here we can also explore the question of observatory. And as we research, when I talk about archaeology, it's really about researching, understanding what we are going to build in every place. And so we started researching what is an observatory, and we discovered those historical forms, where observatories are also mounds, burial mounds that are circular, that have a dome structure, and that always look to the sky, or these kind of temple-like structures that rise us above and allows us to connect to the sky. Most of observatories, whether scientific or more ludic, they have this relationship to circularity, because it's about the sky, this kind of dome that is circular. And circularity has a very specific meaning in Japanese culture. We have the idea of enzo, which is this idea of continuity, no start, no end for things. And then we started discussing in my studio how to express that observatory. And here I'm showing you some tests we do, like small models, we test materials, we take photography to open our imaginary into how the design can evolve. Then came the idea of almost like building a tree, that this observatory can be like a tree that is sitting in its environment. And maybe a tree house where it has some other structures that are along that verticality. So we started testing with different, models and shapes. And again, here we can see these volumes starting to appear. And I really like these models because they're very simple. They're done with very simple material, but then they allow you to, dream into another world and maybe push the design. And sometimes when I visit some sites, I always see some materials as well. Like here, for example, I saw this nut where we have this kind of spike coming out, and they always inspire also the project. Then came the idea that this observatory is almost like a tree that is hanging. The hat of it looks like, this kind of hats in the rice fields. So echoing really the relationship to the field itself, to the nature surrounding it. And moving from the imagination in 3 dimensions to doing like a model, allowing people to, imagining how people will use it. And then the idea became more crystallized, and we have this kind of vertical structure where we have different spaces that occur that are more open spaces for different uses. And this pavilion is actually, this observatory is under construction at the moment. Jumping into scale is what I started my practice with 20 years ago now. And this is the Estonian National Museum. And it's a competition I won. I was 26 at that time. And I did this competition with a few colleagues, and then winning this museum. 34,000 square meters to build in Estonia. At that time I discovered Estonia, and it is south of Finland. And more specifically, this museum was said to be in Tartu. So Tartu is the cultural capital of Estonia. It's really the place where a lot of manifestation for identity, for building their culture has been happening. It's also a place where they have been collecting a lot of objects to maybe resist the Soviet occupation, because they were within the Soviet bloc until 91, and they joined the European Union in 2003. And the museum for them was a way to build an identity, to say that their culture is very much linked to Finno-Ugric culture, which is more related to the north. But when I was looking at this site for the competition, I discovered that there is one of the largest military airfields, ex-Soviet airfields in the Baltic states. So you see this cut that comes into this ground and talks about a very special history of Estonia, because in the site there were also the manifestation for independence for the Estonians. So they used to do these long lines moving from the city of Tartu into that ground, and really looking for their independence and making their manifestations. And then this ground here, where this airfield that looks almost like a utopic space. So then came the idea that the museum cannot just be a building that is sitting, but has to connect to that ground. And maybe by connecting to that ground, it becomes almost an art form. It's not just a building, but it becomes a ground, it becomes a regenerator of its environment. So when we look at the museum, it almost disappears within this landscape. It's -20 there. Of course, I'm a Mediterranean. I grew up in Beirut. So the first time I arrived there, it was freezing cold. But you really learn how to build in that climate, and how to think of an architecture that is more bioclimatic, that reduces its exchange also with the outside. So as we see with this drone, we see this building that sits within its environment, and as it arrives, closer to the city, then it appears and it becomes more of a large entrance from the other side. And this is where actually the building also transforms in terms of its architecture. From one side, it has this big canopy that invites the public into its heart and looks monumental. And from the other side, it disappears as it sits in the landscape. So we have this kind of a line that really meets the ground and then disappears. And within this monumental architecture, we wanted to bring a scale of human scale within it. So the scale of the spaces inside become more smaller, like almost the scales of the houses that we see surrounding it. And we enter into that space, and we have these kind of open spaces between the different functions. You know how sometimes, I'm sure a lot of architects here, we're always struggling with our clients to defend spaces and to say this is not a waste of space, this is a generous space for people to appropriate. And that's what we defended there, that between the functions you have these generous spaces. And those became really the place of life for the museum, where they put this large bear that became part of the installation, or they did their manifestation with concerts that we saw here. And between there, we have also the shop, like we see here, the library space, and all the materials were locally sourced, using wood, using local materials as well. We can see here the facade of the building. So the facade, the idea was to use this technique of serigraphy, but also to maybe symbolically knit the facade with this cornflower pattern, which was knitted by a lot of women as a way of claiming independence during the times of occupation. And it's always beautiful to see how much women were really this kind of silent resistance and resilience to build peace. And it continues to be in the world today. As we see it here, there were lots of production where we see this pattern, but many patterns as well. I move here closer to Turkey, and we're in Lebanon, and that was my first project in Beirut, my hometown, where I grew up. And this is a building that is a residential building. And it's a building that talks about Beirut. You know, Beirut has been destroyed and rebuilt several times. As you see in this photo, it's also about the history of the city, where we see small houses with a red brick tiled roof, but also all the developers' towers that are growing. Almost like the memory of the city is constantly rebuilt and rewritten. And I wanted this building to talk about the memory of Beirut, to talk about, you know, what we have lived within the city. It's a city of life where we're constantly in celebration, as we see in this photo, but it's also constantly erased, like this map that we see of Zarina Hashimi, like this kind of palimpsest of writing and rewriting. Spaces that are beautiful with nature that comes in, where the staircase is celebrated, or even informal constructions where nature is brought through, and questions about housing, about, you know, resource and material, and how we build in the world. And the site where I had to do this project with my team was this ancient, like, concrete manufacture that we see here, written Darwish Haddad on top. And it's very close to the city center of Beirut. So the city center of Beirut, for those who have lived it, was completely devastated after the civil war in '98. It was completely also refurbished. And one of the things that happened when it was refurbished is we really lost the memory of the city. It was full of souks, of, also the destruction that had happened. And sometimes one feels like after destruction, you need that moment of silence that you remember what had happened so it doesn't repeat itself neither. And some of the few actually pictures that remained of the city center were published during this photography session and that led to this publication about Beirut, where we see a publication done by Fouad Al-Khouri, Gabriel Basilico, and other renowned photographers. And we see the memory of Beirut that is scarred, that is bulleted, that is eaten up, and those volumes that are eaten up from the structures that are surrounding that make up the city center. Something that always struck me also is that how we become very frail and almost like our environment. When there is war, people become lose their own body as well. And they become similar to the environment. So our environment and architecture really influences the way we live. It influences our surrounding, and it influences also our behaviors. And this building, I wanted to echo those moments, but transform them into moments of life. So the whole openings within the structure are those hollowed frames that frame the city differently, that bring light differently, but also frame the city almost like a photography that is part of the architecture. And we see Beirut in different forms and shapes, and almost echo the contradiction of this kind of chaotic city that is brought inside the dwellings, because it's a residential building. And the tower is very close to the silos where the explosion had happened in 2020. So these are the white silos where the explosion had happened. And just to situate it, so although I could have done a tower really small, maybe reduce the footprint and go vertically, we decided to embrace the site and to really take this length and this width of the site and allow the building to feel more anchored in the ground. So almost like it's emerging as a sculpture from the floor, from the ground, and it's echoing life again in a city that has always been destroyed. And then you have nature that is brought in an organic way. And nature has its house, has its own dwelling also within this housing development. So we have different sizes of plants that exist also within the volume of this construction, from large gardens to smaller ones. And then as we see it today, it's really growing and bringing life into that tower, almost as if it's a vertical ground that is moving up into the sky of Beirut. something that I noticed afterwards when we see this nature as part of architecture, sometimes it also allows architecture, it allows our buildings to be grounded, to relate to earth, because we can see nature also part of the ground itself. I also wanted that the building itself is worked by hand, that it really expresses the question of craft. And we worked with local artisans. And a lot of the artisans and the workers in Beirut were fleeing from Syria because it was the war when we were constructing there. And I wanted that they are empowered with that moment of construction as well. So they were the one crafting the facade, and we invented the whole plastering technique, and then the whole elevation was combed. So I drew this comb, this metal comb, and it was almost like doing your own tool as an architect to build a structure. So the whole facade was combed, moving from the top level until the ground. And for me, it was also about this kind of seeding the ground, and almost that you are actually creating that fertile ground that rises up vertically in Beirut. They produced many of those combs for the facade. And surprisingly, it all started with this kind of clay models in my practice. So we did these small clay like sculptures, and then I was doing this with fork with my team. And then this kind of like striation started to emerge and really inform that construction. So also how much sometimes it's also about this artisanal work and this experimental work we do in our practices and in our studios. The ground floor of the building is a center that is dedicated to image and to discussion around the Middle East and creation in the Middle East. And it's a raw space where I fought a lot with my client also about the finishes. He wanted to keep it all raw, so we kept it at the end all concrete and raw. And we enter into the building, there is this kind of cocoon-like feeling where we have this light comes in, it's a small lobby. And then the apartments are always relating to the outside with this nature and this creation. And as we see here, like the window is framing the outside, but then feels like it's a painting or like maybe a photography that is hanging inside the apartment. And of course, this relationship to the city, as we see. I'm sure in Turkey we have these typical floor plans that are built always the same floor plan of housing and that dictate the same way of living for everyone. And that's something that I really wanted to fight in Beirut, and to allow the floor plan to be very different from one level to the other, and bringing those gardens. And by bringing those kind of different variety of openings, it allowed really that every floor is completely different and that is individualized by the users of the ones that bought the houses. After the explosion, the building really didn't. All the outside was really intact. Some friends were telling me like it's almost like it actually moved somewhere else and came back after the explosion. But I think it's also about that grounding of architecture that really is related to its place that allowed it to sustain such an explosion. Of course, all the interiors were destroyed and recently refurbished. But this is one of the drones that like footage that was taken after the explosion. We can see here also how it sits within its environment and also dialogues with the urban regulation of Beirut. I love when people sit with their flannel outside, those in Mediterranean climates. And then we had the electricity crisis in Beirut. All the city was plunged in darkness, and we took those photos with photographer Lauriane Gnitouyou, where we see this kind of almost shadow of a building. And that gave also the inspiration to produce a book about light, but also to talk about light in its genesis, what is light, the archaeology of light, places that despite all the technology and the development we have today in bringing electrical light, that are without light, but also light as a way of expressing materiality. I'm finishing with two projects here. There is Hermès project, which is workshops that we build in Normandy. And this is the first low-carbon, energy-positive building in France. And it's a manufacturing facility for Hermès. So it's very difficult to be able to build a manufacturing facility to be low-carbon, but also energy-positive. That means that it distributes its energy to the surrounding. So it's highly sustainable as a structure. And it all started by looking at the act of building and also of knitting and this precision that happens within the whole manufacture, working with leather and working with all the products that they produce. And I wanted that the architecture really talks about the same precision, where we work again with the hand and with the scale of the hand. And almost talk about this leather or this texture that we can see also in this material. And when we're looking at materials that are close by, we discovered that there are local artisanal brick makers. And of course, brick at the moment is not used for structures. They are used for renovation and for mainly like cladding of facades. So the challenge was here, let's use actually bricks for the construction of the project and allow that by using the material very close to the site to reduce the carbon footprint of the project. And as it is a manufacture, the idea was also to have this kind of a grid-like structure that sits almost in continuity to its environment and that is compacted. So it really impacts the least possible its natural environment. And as we see in this illustration, all the workshops and the making spaces, they are located in the north, actually. So we see here on the northern end of this diagram, also to take advantage of natural light. So it's really by a series of very bioclimatic moves, by linking to our environment and linking to the resources, that we are able to build a structure that is low carbon, that is also low in impact on its environment. And this is a bit more technical, but really interesting, is that by doing that, we get closer to the comfort zone of human beings, which is around 23 degrees. So basically, the building doesn't need a lot of climatization or heating to allow us to use it. So this is already a big step, actually, into building something that is more sustainable. And as we use natural material, all the materials look very almost close to nature, with the brick, with the wood, with the also insulation. And here we see photos of the earth from which we used, earth of the site to manufacture the bricks. We did 550,000 bricks. With the brick maker, who was very proud to produce them. Of course, very tired at the end, but he was nonetheless quite happy. And we worked with these ovens that are like traditional ovens, and cooked the brick, dried them. And there is a sense of pride always when we're building, because like all the constructors are also part of this process of making that becomes a human venture rather than about just building a structure. And then I discovered also that the colors of the brick, they change according to the temperature of cooking. So once you bake them more, they become more violet, and we chose those violet colors. The only disappointment was that starting to build on site, we discovered that there were no masons that are able to build with brick anymore, because it's an old technique and there are not enough masons who know how to master brick construction. So we ended up having to teach and to make, bring a master mason who taught all the others how to build with bricks. And then they were again proud in this construction. And we printed the facades in one-to-one, and then they used the facades to be able to do all the arches. So the process was really one of care and of building step by step. And the whole facade itself is about these arches. Of course, as Lucan says, the natural span of a brick construction is an arch, but it's also about the horse, because as you know, Hermès is about the saddlery remaking and horse riding. So this idea of gallops of the horse and this movement that is embodied in the scale of the facade. When we enter inside that curve, or inside the building, that curve is also present in different forms. It's present through the saddles, but also present through these arches, and we see this succession of arches within this manufacture. I was always keen, as in many projects, that we integrate nature as part of the building. And here we enter into nature, we enter into a courtyard instead of entering into the building immediately. And this becomes the place of social gathering, of bringing the artisans together. And there's always this kind of magic of the place as it sits at night. And we see these different layering also of brick arches in the surrounding. And then the whole building is echoing those gallops of the horses. Finishing up with the renovation of the British Museum, and this is the renovation of the western range of the British Museum. And it's a big responsibility, because we look at all the collection of the Middle East, Mediterranean, we go to ancient Egypt, Rome. And the question here is, how do you talk about this collection? How did it arrive to the British Museum? How do we talk about the original spaces and places where this collection is coming from? So we're not only designing and building a renovation or expanding the British Museum, but also we're talking about the origins, and we're talking about the contemporary places where the collection is coming from. For example, when we're talking about the Lamassous, which are these kind of big sculptures that were protecting Assyrian palaces in the past, in present time Iraq, we think that we don't want them to be embedded in the architecture, but they are floating within this space, and then the whole scaffold becomes a place where we talk about questions of origin, of movement, of relevance of those cultures to today. Other stories like those of Hornechitif, who is an ancient priest from ancient Egypt. How do we talk about the coffin of Hornechitif? So the coffin of all the priests and the mummies of ancient Egypt is ornamented with the goddess Nut. So this goddess Nut is really protecting him and guiding him into the afterlife. But also we talk about the Karnak temples. So in that sense, the space where Hornechitif will be exhibited or put forward is one that is intimate, where we bring a certain reverence to the mummies that are put in the museum, but also we talk about this kind of notion of celestial relationship and this goddess Nut that becomes the ceiling of the space itself. Something more relevant to where we are at the moment is the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, which is one of the 7 wonders of the world, which is in present time Bodrum. And this was like the question, how do we display it, give it a sense of, again, a sense of dignity, that the objects are not just put in a lambda hole, but they are positioned to talk about that kind of grandiosity of the space that existed and this mausoleum. And we started imagining creating that large void where we see Mausolus and Artemis that are sitting at the end of those pathways, but also where the ground itself is echoing the site that exists today. And there's always this relationship of how the space becomes not only a museum, but also a place of discussion and of conversation about objects. So we looked at the archaeology as it exists at the moment, and how to bring sense of contemporaneity also in those spaces, where in the alcoves and in the basement of the museum we have also educational areas. And then as other spaces where we talk about pottery and this idea of also reusing the demolition material of other spaces into building this kind of vertical gallery as we see it here. So the museum is not only about displaying collection, it's about also bringing on the relationship between civilization, in a way connecting our world together and connecting the different civilizations together. This is another view of that vertical gallery that we are creating. And it's also a place of contemporaneity. Maybe a better dancer can be also performing here. Actually, one last one to finish with, and this was intervention we did with in Milano, in Palazzo Litta, for the Design Week just a few weeks ago. And again, in the process of designing, always looking at the history of the places. So what is Palazzo Litta, how it moved from a private residence to a palace that hosted a lot of performances, but also theaters. It's a place of celebration. It's also a Baroque architecture. And then we were thinking how to express that in the installation we will do. And we thought about the subject of metamorphosis and expressing metamorphosis in architecture, but also in an architecture that is on the edge between art, architecture, and design, and that talks about evolution. So we questioned what can change actually when we design, and what can change maybe is our perception, relationship to the use of the place, the material, the light, the human interaction, and from what to what. So how can it become from a private palace to a public space, a place that is dynamic, that is open. And as we move today in a very fast environment and life, where we always move from A to B, maybe it's a place that slows us down, so that allows us to meander, and hence the idea of bringing a labyrinth into the courtyard of Palazzo Litta. And the labyrinth that maybe expresses also this idea of Baroque construction that is modular. So we can see here, for example, the courtyard and how this labyrinth got shaped. So looking really at the geometry of the place and slowly building up this labyrinthic space, and then allowing different qualities of spaces and different experiences to happen. So places where people could gather for a talk, places where you can experience the smell of lemon and musk from Mediterranean climates, or other spaces just to rest in a very intense environment of Milano. And those were like initial watercolors I did, and then starting to imagine that labyrinth where you could enter, and it's like a more colorful space that brings us into maybe a sense of joy in that context, and that surprises us when we enter into that courtyard. And those were the recent photos we had from the installation. And for me, it was a very interesting experiment, because I felt like it's quite needed as a public space, because it created those very intimate spaces where we could gather with 4 people, and allowed more encounter between people. Because when you're sitting in a large public space, you don't really meet your neighbor. But when you're in such maybe a smaller space, it became like a place of more intimacy and more encounter between different people. Maybe it's Italy as well. In Milano, everyone speaks to everyone else. But it was also this idea of experimenting with color. So you have the pink, but also red colors, and different gradation of hues of reds that we used, that allowed also the magic of this place and the multiplicity of colors. We made this drone discreetly, because everything was prohibited in Milano, so we flew it because we really wanted to see how it looked above. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. I don't know if there are questions that are allowed.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have time, so we can have questions.
I made a dance performance with you.
Hi, thank you so much. It was really inspiring. I always wondered about your work. How do you balance creating your own visual language with, because a lot of your work, all of your work is contextual and you do research, and what is based on research does not always have a distinct visual language. How do you look at building your own visual language as an artist, as an architect?
Yeah, I think it's a subject that does not obsess me at all, you know, the question of building my own visual language, because I think it, at the end, when you're designing as a designer or as an architect, what is very important is that the space is really a place that brings people into an extraordinary realm, that expresses a certain anchoring and relationship to the place, to the history of the environment in which it sits. Its ecology is important. If it's an object, is how you touch it, how you move, you know, what kind of memory it expresses when you're using such an object. And I think as a result of all this research or all this archaeology, in a way there is a memory that is built in any construction or any object, and it becomes part of its identity. But it's not necessarily an obsession with style. It's an obsession with atemporality, or with a sense of maybe relevance of what one is doing, relevance to the people, to the environment, and with the care for a positive act of building.
Thank you. They have an affinity to each other, but not as a continuation, but I guess as contextualizing.
Yes, yeah. And I think at the end you can see certain continuity in the work that is not necessarily about style. It's about maybe a sense of poetics that exists from one work to the other, a sense of maybe like pertinence or relevance or materiality that is expressed, because it's any project is linked to its environment and to us as material beings.
Maybe framework of thinking rather than building.
Yes.
First, thank you for your talk. It was very enlightening. Actually, I'm curious. I want to know how like you deal with project that has a strong like background, and then how you make it like reflect its present but also its future.
You mean like, for example, in Beirut, where you have a relationship to a very heavy story. So I think it's you have to look at the context, you have to look at the place and try to anchor architecture in its place to express the memory of it, but also that it actually is able to bring something new. So for example, the tower in Beirut talks maybe about that history of a very war-torn city that is hollowed, and through those hollows we see we generate new loggias, new spaces, but at the same time those become places of life, of nature. So it looks at the future in that sense and produces from a very traumatizing event maybe a look towards hope and towards an optimistic future.
Thank you so much. I was also going to ask about the tower in Beirut. You mentioned that you hollowed out these spaces. And when I was first in Beirut, many of the buildings of the port were bullet-riddled. And I see that your building has these tiny openings. Was that meant as an analogy, or is it Is it just me
Yeah.
remembering?
I think there is this subconscious analogy that is present, and at the same time, those little opening from the south facade is also they are made for ventilation and for smaller facilities like restrooms and other. And actually, this facade is bound to be covered at some point because the exploitation factor in the construction in Beirut allows that anyone could build a tower behind. Thankfully, actually, after the emergence of Stone Garden, the neighbor decided to renovate and to stay, as it is at the moment. I'm saying that to explain that they are not large openings; they are smaller. So, from one side, they express that idea of bullets and the skin of Beirut, and from the other side, they respond also to functionality of the structure.
Thank you.
Thank you for your speech and for the presentation you have made. I have a small question. I see that you are using unique materials at your projects, and you are making different kind of project in different cultures. I just want to know how you decide to work on a project, because time is also important for everyone, and how you decide what is the key that you accept the project actually to work on.
First, there is the client, because for me, it's about partnership. When I'm working on a project, it's really about how you build partnership with the different people you're working with. And if you have a visionary client, someone who is able to respect architecture, to have the also a common value system, that they're not just building a structure for it's only looking at only the financial side. There is a holistic thinking, and there is this ambition that has to be part of the project. So that's the first element that is important. And then it's also the subject of the building that you're doing. We're interested in cultural buildings, more and more museums at the moment. We're invited to competitions that are of this nature, which we're interested in. But also, how can we contribute positively to the environment? It's very important that every project has a meaning that is not about just another project that you're or construction that you're putting in place.
Thank you.
Okay. This is why sometimes I feel like I'm on a slow architecture. Maybe everyone. Yeah. Thank you so much for questions.